How could she do this to me? How?
Stephen Martin sat in courtroom 4B on the 9th floor of the Daly Center in downtown Chicago, and he was smiling. That was the first strange thing people noticed. A man about to lose his house, his cars, and half of everything he had built over 10 years of hard work, smiling like he had already won the lottery. Across the aisle, his wife Naomi Liamson sat with her arms crossed and her chin high. She was 29 years old, and even in a plain gray blazer she looked like she belonged on a magazine cover. Her lawyer, a sharp man named Gregory Voss, kept whispering numbers in her ear. Big numbers. The house on Prairie Avenue, the Range Rover, half of Stephen's construction company, alimony for the next 10 years. Naomi didn't even look at her husband. Why would she? In her mind, this was already over. "Mr. Martins," the judge said, adjusting her glasses, "your wife's attorney has submitted a settlement request totaling $2.3 million in assets, plus monthly spousal support of $8,000. Does your legal counsel wish to respond?" Stephen's lawyer, an older woman named Patricia Owusu, stood up slowly. She was not in a hurry. She never was. "Yes, Your Honor," Patricia said. "We do have a response. But before we get to numbers, we'd like to submit one document into evidence." Naomi rolled her eyes. She leaned over to Gregory and whispered something. He shrugged. Nobody in that courtroom, except Stephen and Patricia, had any idea that the next 10 minutes would change everything. To understand how Stephen Martins ended up smiling in a divorce courtroom, you have to go back to a summer night on the south side of Chicago, at a rooftop party in the West Loop. Stephen was 32, tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of quiet confidence that comes from building something with your own two hands. He owned Martins Construction and Renovation, a company he had started with $4,000 and a used pickup truck when he was 23. By the time he was 30, that company had grown into a name people trusted all across Cook County. He wasn't a millionaire yet, not exactly, but he was close, and everyone who knew him could see he was going places. Naomi Liamson was 26 back then, working as a receptionist at a downtown dental office, but that job was never the plan. Naomi had bigger plans. She had grown up in Englewood, watching her mother struggle to pay rent every single month, and she had promised herself a long time ago that she would never live like that. She wanted the penthouse. She wanted the vacations. She wanted a man who could give her a life where money was never a question. When she met Stephen at that rooftop party, she didn't see a hard-working man with kind eyes. She saw an opportunity. "So what do you do?" she had asked him, twirling a strand of her braids around her finger. "I run a construction company," Stephen said. "Nothing fancy. Just started out small." Naomi smiled. She had already looked him up before the party even started. One of her girlfriends had pointed him out and mentioned his company had just landed a $2 million contract to renovate a string of apartment buildings in Bronzeville. "That's amazing," she said, touching his arm. "I love a man who builds things." 6 months later, they were engaged. A year after that, they were married in a beautiful ceremony at a hotel on Michigan Avenue, with 200 guests and a live band. Naomi wore a dress that cost more than Stephen's first truck. Stephen's mother, Miss Odessa, did not come to the wedding smiling. She sat in the front row with a face like she was watching a funeral, not a wedding. "Baby," she told her son the night before, "that girl's eyes light up for your money, not for you. A mother knows these things." "Ma, you don't know her," Stephen had said. "She loves me." Miss Odessa said nothing more. She just held his hand and prayed quietly. The first 2 years of marriage were good, or at least they looked good. They bought a beautiful brick house on Prairie Avenue with a wide front porch and a garden in the back. Naomi quit her receptionist job the month after the wedding. "I want to focus on being a wife," she told Stephen, though what she really meant was she wanted to focus on shopping. She bought designer purses. She got her hair and nails done every 2 weeks at the most expensive salon in the Gold Coast. She took trips to Miami and Cancun with her girlfriends, always posting pictures online with captions like "blessed" and "living my best life." Stephen worked. He woke up at 5 a.m. every day, drove to job sites across the city, argued with contractors, checked on his crews, and came home tired but proud. His company grew bigger. He landed contracts to build apartment complexes in the South Loop. He hired more workers. Slowly, quietly, without flashy cars or watches, Stephen Martins became a genuinely wealthy man. And slowly, quietly, Naomi began to resent him for it. Not because he had money, she loved that part. She resented that he still drove an old pickup truck to work sites, still wore plain t-shirts and jeans, still preferred a home-cooked meal over an expensive restaurant. She wanted a husband who acted rich. She had married a builder, but she wanted a peacock. "Stephen, we could buy a house in Lincoln Park," she said one night at dinner. "Somewhere with a view of the lake. Why are we still in this neighborhood? Naomi, this house is paid off. We don't owe anyone a dime for it. Why would I trade that for a mortgage 3 times the size? Because we can afford it. We can afford it because I don't waste money," Stephen said calmly. That's the whole point. Naomi didn't say anything else that night, but something in her had already decided this marriage wasn't giving her what she wanted. It was around this time that Naomi started spending more time with a man named Darius, whom she introduced to Stephen as just a friend from the gym. Darius drove a Mercedes he didn't own, it was leased, and wore watches he couldn't afford, but he knew how to talk. He told Naomi she deserved better. He told her a woman as beautiful as her shouldn't have to beg her husband for a bigger house. Stephen wasn't stupid. He noticed the late-night phone calls Naomi would take in the bathroom with the door locked. He noticed the new perfume she wore that he never bought her. He noticed how she started criticizing him more. His clothes, his truck, his boring way of living. But Stephen was a patient man. And more than that, he was a smart man. He didn't confront her right away. Instead, he did something his mother had once told him every smart businessman should do. He protected himself, quietly, before the storm arrived. Stephen had a friend from church, a lawyer named Marcus Diallo, who specialized in family law. One evening, Stephen invited Marcus over for dinner while Naomi was out with her girlfriends, which by then, everyone except Stephen pretended to believe. "Marcus, I need you to be straight with me," Stephen said. "If things go bad between Naomi and me, and I have a feeling they will, what happens to my company? My house? Everything I built before she even knew my name?" Marcus asked him a few questions. "When did you buy the house?" "Before the marriage." "When did you start the company?" 9 years before you even met her." "Did she ever put in a single dollar or a single hour of work into the business?" "Not $1. Not 1 hour," Stephen said. "Then legally," Marcus explained, "most of what you built before the marriage should be protected as separate property, not marital property. But Illinois courts can sometimes muddy those lines, especially if she claims she contributed in other ways, emotional support, managing the household, and the like. If you want real protection, you need documentation, paper trails, and if there's ever a chance she's stepped outside the marriage, that could matter too, depending on what agreements are in place." "We don't have a prenup," Stephen admitted. "My mother told me to get one. I didn't listen." Marcus tapped his pen on the table. "Then we need to build the next best thing. A postnuptial agreement. It's not too late. But you'll need her signature, and she has to sign it willingly." "She'll never sign anything that protects my money," Stephen said. Marcus smiled. "She will, if she thinks it protects hers too." 2 months later, over a candlelit dinner, Stephen cooked himself. Shrimp and grits, Naomi's favorite. He brought up an idea he had been planting seeds for. "Naomi, baby, I've been thinking," he said. "With the company growing so fast and property values changing, I want us to sit down with a lawyer and set up something that protects both of us. Not because I don't trust you, because I love you, and I want to make sure that no matter what happens in life, you're always taken care of, and so am I." Naomi's eyes lit up, not with love, but with the thought that maybe Stephen was finally about to give her guaranteed access to his growing fortune, locked in on paper. "That's actually really smart," she said, smiling sweetly. "I think that's a great idea." A week later, they met with Marcus in his office downtown. He presented a document that Naomi barely read past the first 2 pages, where it clearly stated she would be entitled to a fair and generous settlement in the event of a divorce, a number that made her giddy with excitement. What she skimmed past, buried in legal language on page 7, was a single clause. If either party is found to have engaged in infidelity during the marriage, as evidenced by reasonable proof, including, but not limited to, communications, financial records, or witness testimony, the offending party forfeits all claims to spousal support and division of marital assets beyond property, acquired jointly and explicitly documented as shared. Naomi signed it without a second thought. Why would infidelity ever come up? She had no plans to get caught. She should have read more carefully. Over the following year, Naomi's relationship with Darius grew bolder. She started staying out until 2 or 3 in the morning. She took a girls' trip to Atlanta that was really just her and Darius in a hotel suite for 4 days. She even let Darius borrow money from her, money that, of course, was really Stephen's. Stephen knew. He had known for a while. But instead of confronting her in anger, he did what any good businessman does with a valuable investment. He documented everything. He hired a private investigator, a soft-spoken but thorough man named Wendell Cross, who had worked for over 20 years finding truths people tried to bury. Wendell followed Naomi discreetly for 4 months. He got photographs of her and Darius at hotels. He obtained receipts showing Naomi had wired Darius nearly $30,000 over the course of a year. Money she had taken from a joint account Stephen had set up for household expenses. He recorded phone records showing calls between Naomi and Darius at 1, 2, sometimes 3 in the morning, sometimes lasting over an hour. Every piece of it was legal. Every piece of it was true. And every piece of it was locked away safely with Marcus Diallo, waiting. Stephen didn't say a word to Naomi. He kept coming home, kept working, kept being the same steady, quiet husband he had always been. Some nights it hurt him deeply, lying next to a woman he knew was betraying him. But he told himself something his mother always said. Don't fight fire in the dark, baby. Wait for daylight, then let the truth burn on its own. It was Naomi in the end who filed for divorce. She had grown tired of pretending. Darius had convinced her that with Stephen's business now worth well over $3 million and property across the city, a divorce could set her up for life. She hired Gregory Voss, one of the most aggressive divorce attorneys in Chicago, a man known for squeezing every last dollar out of wealthy husbands. Trust me, Miss Liamson, Gregory told her during their first meeting. With 10 years of marriage, no prenup on record that I can find yet, and a husband whose company grew significantly during your marriage, you are entitled to a very comfortable settlement. We're talking millions. Naomi smiled the whole car ride home. She had already started looking at penthouse listings in Streeterville. What neither she nor Gregory knew was that a postnuptial agreement did exist, filed quietly, legally, and completely valid, sitting in a folder in Marcus Diallo's office, waiting for the right moment. Your Honor, Patricia Owusu said, walking toward the judge's bench with a thin folder in her hand. We'd like to submit Exhibit A, a postnuptial agreement signed by both parties on March 14th, 3 years ago, along with supporting evidence relevant to a clause within that agreement. Gregory Voss stood up immediately. Objection, Your Honor. This is the first we're hearing of any postnuptial agreement. It was never disclosed during discovery. It was disclosed, Your Honor, Patricia said calmly. Filed with the court 8 weeks ago as part of our formal response. Copies were sent to opposing counsel's office. We have the delivery confirmation right here. She placed a signed receipt on the bench. Gregory's face went pale. Somehow, somewhere, his office had missed it. Or, as would later come out, an overworked paralegal had simply filed it away without flagging it for review. Naomi turned to Gregory, her eyes wide with panic. What is he talking about? I don't know, Gregory whispered. Give me a second. The judge held up a hand. Counsel, approach the bench. After a tense 5 minutes of hushed arguing, the judge overruled the objection. The document was valid, properly filed, and would be entered into evidence. Your Honor, Patricia continued, the agreement in question contains a clause stating that in the case of proven infidelity by either party, that party forfeits rights to spousal support and division of marital assets beyond jointly documented property. We have evidence, submitted here in this folder, demonstrating a sustained extramarital relationship between Mrs. Liamson and a Mr. Darius Coleman over the past 16 months, including photographic evidence, financial records showing the transfer of marital funds to Mr. Coleman, and phone records confirming regular contact, consistent with a romantic relationship. The courtroom went dead silent. Naomi's face drained of color. "This is insane," she said, standing up. "You had someone following me?" "Mrs. Liamson, please sit down," the judge said sharply. "Your Honor, this is a setup," Naomi shouted. "He's making this up." "I assure you, Your Honor," Patricia said, "every document in this folder is authentic, properly obtained, and admissible. We're happy to have Mr. Cross, the licensed investigator who compiled this evidence, testify under oath if needed." The judge flipped through the documents slowly. Photographs of Naomi and Darius holding hands outside a hotel on Michigan Avenue. Bank statements showing wire transfers from a joint account to an account under Darius Coleman's name. Phone records showing calls at 1:47 a.m., 2:12 a.m., 3:03 a.m., night after night for months. The judge looked up over her glasses, first at the documents, then at Naomi, then back at the documents. "Mrs. Liamson," the judge said, "did you sign a postnuptial agreement with your husband 3 years ago?" Naomi's mouth opened, but nothing came out at first. Gregory leaned over, whispering something urgently in her ear, but it was too late. She had already nodded, out of pure shock, before catching herself. I don't remember all the details," she stammered. "I signed a lot of paperwork. My husband told me it was to protect me." "It was to protect both of you," the judge said flatly. "Under the terms you agreed to, and given the evidence submitted, this clause appears both valid and directly applicable to your case." Gregory tried one last time. "Your Honor, we'd like time to review the authenticity of this agreement and the supposed evidence before any ruling is made." "Granted," the judge said. "We'll reconvene in 2 weeks. But I want to be clear with everyone in this room. If this document holds up, and so far it appears properly executed and witnessed, Mrs. Liamson's claim to spousal support and division of business assets may be entirely forfeited under its terms." Naomi turned to look at Stephen for the first time all day. He wasn't smiling anymore. He was just watching her, calm and steady, the same way he had watched her for the last 10 years while she slowly showed him exactly who she was. "Stephen," she whispered, "how could you do this to me?" "I didn't do anything to you, Naomi," Stephen said quietly. "You did this to yourself. I just made sure the truth had somewhere safe to live until it was ready to come out." The second hearing didn't last nearly as long as the first. Gregory Voss had spent 2 weeks trying to find any crack in the postnuptial agreement, arguing coercion, arguing Naomi hadn't fully understood the document, arguing the investigators' methods were somehow improper. None of it held up. Marcus Diallo had done everything by the book 3 years earlier, exactly as the law required. Wendell Cross had followed every legal guideline for licensed investigators in the state of Illinois. In the end, the judge ruled clearly and firmly. The postnuptial agreement was valid. The infidelity clause applied. Naomi Liamson was entitled only to property that had been explicitly and jointly acquired and documented during the marriage, which amounted to a car she had purchased herself with her own earnings before quitting her job, some furniture, and half of a joint savings account that held just under $40,000, money that had mostly come from Naomi's own contributions before she stopped working. She would receive no share of Martin's construction and renovation, no share of the house on Prairie Avenue, which had been purchased with Stephen's money before the marriage, no spousal support. Naomi sat in the courtroom that day in a black dress, no longer looking confident, no longer looking like a woman who had already won. She looked like someone who had just realized, far too late, that the ground beneath her feet had never truly been solid. Outside the courthouse, reporters from a local news blog that covered interesting Cook County court cases had somehow caught wind of the story. Word travels fast in Chicago's legal circles, and a small crowd of onlookers had gathered near the steps. "Mrs. Liamson, do you have any comment?" one reporter called out. Naomi said nothing. She pulled her coat tighter around herself and walked quickly to a car that Darius was supposed to be waiting in. He wasn't there. He had already stopped answering her calls the moment the story about the infidelity clause started circulating among their mutual friends. Darius, it turned out, had never actually loved her either. He had simply been hoping to ride her expected millions into a comfortable life of his own. Without the money, there was nothing left for him to want. Stephen walked out of the courthouse a different way, avoiding the small crowd, his lawyer Patricia beside him. "You all right?" Patricia asked. "Yeah," Stephen said, letting out a long breath he felt like he had been holding for 3 years. "I really am." Life moved forward the way it always does, whether people are ready for it or not. Naomi moved into a small one-bedroom apartment in a modest part of Bronzeville. The very kind of neighborhood she had once looked down on. The very kind of life she had spent her whole marriage trying to escape. She got a new job, this time at a car dealership, answering phones and scheduling test drives. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't the life she had dreamed about at that rooftop party 3 years earlier. But it was honest work, and slowly, she started to understand something her own mother had tried to tell her years before. That a life built on shortcuts always eventually collapses, while a life built on real effort tends to last. She never spoke to Darius again after that day outside the courthouse. She heard through mutual friends that he had moved on to another woman within 2 months, some new target for his same old game. Stephen, on the other hand, kept building. His company landed its biggest contract yet, a major renovation project for a chain of community centers across the south and west sides of Chicago. The kind of work that meant something to him beyond just the money. He hired more workers from the neighborhoods he grew up in, gave several young men their very first real jobs, and slowly became known not just as a successful businessman, but as a man who genuinely cared about the communities he worked in. His mother, Miss Odessa, finally got the chance to say the thing she had held back for years. "I'm not going to say I told you so," she said one Sunday over dinner, smiling as she passed him a plate of cornbread. "But baby, I told you so." Stephen laughed, really laughed, for what felt like the first time in years. "Yes, ma'am, you did." About a year after the divorce was finalized, Stephen met a woman named Denise, a school teacher from Hyde Park with a warm laugh and no interest whatsoever in his money. She drove her own car, paid her own bills, and the first time Stephen tried to pay for dinner on their third date, she insisted on splitting it. "I like a man who works hard," she told him. "But I'm not with you for what you have. I'm with you for who you are." Stephen smiled the same quiet smile he always had, the one that had carried him through years of hard work and years of hard lessons. "That," he said, "is exactly what I needed to hear." Back in her small apartment one evening, Naomi sat by her window, looking out over the city lights of Chicago, the same skyline she used to dream about conquering. She thought about the rooftop party where it all began, about the way she had looked at Stephen that night, not as a person, but as a stepping stone. She thought about her mother, who had passed away 2 years before the divorce, and how her mother used to say, "Naomi, baby, a house built on love lasts. A house built on greed always falls down eventually." She hadn't understood it then, she understood it now. There was no dramatic ending for Naomi, no sudden redemption, no big lesson wrapped up in a neat bow, just a woman, 29 years old, sitting alone in a small apartment, finally starting to rebuild her life from the ground up, this time, for real, with nothing but her own 2 hands. And across the city, in a warm home on Prairie Avenue, Stephen Martin sat on his porch with Denise beside him, watching the sun go down over a life he had built, protected, and finally, truly gotten to enjoy. Sometimes the truth takes its time, but when it finally arrives, it changes everything.